façon de faire la paix, c'est aussi rompre les silences.
Dans les perspectives terrifiantes qui s'ouvrent à l'humanité, nous apercevons encore mieux que la paix est le seul combat qui mérite d'être mené. Camus l'avait écrite au lendemain d'Hiroshima.
La paix est beaucoup plus difficile à gagner que la guerre.
Peace is when the country uses its resources to provide for the needs of its people.
Ce que nous avons en commun est bien plus grand que nos différences. Rappelons-nous l'enseignement de Russell et Einstein. Souvenez-vous de votre humanité, oubliez le reste et vive la paix.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Abbey aux Dames for the second day of our World Peace Forum, Normandy for Peace. And like yesterday, I am with Frédéric Bedos, founder of the NGO project Imagine. Thank you very much for your warm welcome, and I'm also always very honored to co-moderate this event with François-Xavier Priot, Vice President of the Normandy region in charge of European and international affairs. Of course, this event is held in the strict respect of the health measures recommended by the government and its scientific council, so don't forget in the village, in the stand, or anywhere on site to keep your mask. You have lunch seated, and also comply with physical distanciation measures like we are doing on this stage. And let me remind you of the specificity of our forum. First, it's stronger than COVID, it's stronger than storms as well, and it is also open to all and everybody. And we see this morning again that we have many young people with us. We want the greatest numbers to be able to participate in the forum, either here at Abbey aux Dames, but also on the web, by following us on YouTube, and by asking your questions on social media or by text messages. And I'd like to greet all the internet users. Feel free to use the hashtag that you see on the screen. We had very intense debate yesterday with the incredible testimony of Dr. Amadi Balour, this wonderful Syrian woman whose courage we discovered, her courage during the civil war when she worked with a lot of the population in Syria under the regime of Bashar al-Assad, thanks to the beautiful documentary The Cave that was shown yesterday here in the evening. A short summary of yesterday. Now.
Visible, qui accapare les biens communs. Il y en a une qui est invisible, plus discrète, mais qui protège les biens communs. Elle est majoritaire. Peut-être qu'à un moment ou à un autre, elle va s'organiser et c'est peut-être elle qui va renverser le système.
Je pense que c'est ça que je recherchais en venant, c'était vraiment à m'instruire, à m'éduquer en fait sur le sujet pour pouvoir plus tard moi aussi faire des actions concrètes finalement pour bâtir quelque chose de mieux après. Je pense qu'on est nombreux, après avoir vu toutes ces conférences, à se dire j'ai envie de faire bouger les choses, de changer le système, de bâtir un meilleur futur.
Et toutes ces intelligences qu'on a mis au pouvoir de notre confort, de notre réussite, peut-être qu'on pourra aussi le mettre pour notre survie, c'est l'espoir que je donne, donc j'y crois.
On dépend tous de la nature et de la terre. Si on la détruit, on n'aura rien.
Chacun a une responsabilité. C'était à chacun de sentir d'abord d'être citoyen est quelque chose d'extraordinaire. On a la possibilité d'écouter les autres, d'apprendre, d'avoir un contact avec les gens et de sentir qu'ils ne sont pas seuls.
Alors, mesdames et messieurs, donc...
Ladies and gentlemen, in 1 month, the American presidential election will take place. The first debate that opposed the president to his opponent Joe Biden took place last night, and everybody is well aware that this presidential election is relevant for the whole world. For 4 years now, we've seen that international relations and multilateralism could be impacted by behaviors that take place on the international arena. The American election, a very uncertain election and a crucial one, well, who could better talk about it than a former French ambassador who represented our country in the United States. Please welcome Gérard Haraud. Good morning, my dear Hervé, Mr. President. This forum that I'm discovering is a wonderful endeavor. Congratulations, and congratulations to the whole region and the team that organized this meeting. I'm not going to tell you about the results of the elections because I don't want to deprive you of the suspense until November 3rd. So I'll keep this result for myself. This morning, I just wanted to point out a couple of things which, in a way, are dependent upon the American election on November 3rd. It's probably the most important one since the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932. Never in an American election have we seen two candidates opposing themselves and representing two not even different choices, but antagonistic choices. Currently, you see two Americas that are confronting one another, that don't understand or talk with one another, and the one that will win will inevitably entail consequences on your lives, and not only on the security of our country, but also on your daily lives. If Donald Trump wins, of course, he will feel strengthened by this new electoral success. So it's unavoidable that he will take his vision of the world to its extreme. And we know it. It's America first, which means America alone, in fact. It's, well, he's a president that doesn't care about alliances or values. He understands only the balance of powers, and he implements them in the most brutal way, which means that we don't know whether NATO will survive. It will mean a hostile attitude to multilateralism. He wonders if he's re-elected, he will start a trade war with the EU. When the President of the Republic was in Washington in April 2018, he said, well, we share your problems with China, we can work together. And the answer of Donald Trump, what is out of the question? The European Union is worse than China. When I solve the problem of China, I will tackle the European Union. So we can expect the worst. We can expect to see the multilateral system to be hard hit. The US have already left UNESCO, the World Health Organization, and they will go even further. So we will see a world of people who eat the others, of great powers, of brutal relationships, and only the European Union will remain soft. What will the Europeans do in front of these realities? I don't know. I don't know, because the issue at stake here is the union, the unity of the European Union. But amongst its members, there are countries that show a clear sympathy towards Donald Trump's America. The Prime Minister in Hungary declared that he was supporting Donald Trump, as well as the Polish Prime Minister. So what will happen after Donald Trump's election, if he's elected? Will we see some Europeans running to Washington to try and obtain privileges, or conversely, will we see a union between the Europeans in front of this challenge to our values and our interests? I don't know. As a diplomat or as a Frenchman, I'm not really optimistic, unfortunately. Second assumption, Joe Biden wins. Now, the first reaction will be that will be happy about that. Joe Biden talks like the Americans are used to being talked to. He's using very commonplace platitudes. He will try and heal hurt egos. He will hug everybody. We will see the America that we like coming back, but we could make a mistake to think that we are coming back to the US of before, that will take care of our security and do everything that is a dirty job on our behalf. And we will criticize the US. If we look at Obama's presidency, we realize that in Syria and Ukraine, in Sahel, the Americans did nothing. They did nothing, and that's really a turning point in the United States. The US don't want to be the policeman of the world any longer. They are tired. The Americans are tired. They are fed up with costly military interventions like in Afghanistan or Iraq. So in this new world, the policeman of the world will not be there any longer. Now, of course, we were complaining of the US when they were doing this job of policeman of the world. We were saying they were violent and clumsy. Now, look what is going on in the Eastern Mediterranean, where there is no policeman of the world. Do you think the Turks could have sent militia in Libya if the Americans were still playing their role, or whether the Libyans were doing what they are doing in Syria now, or Azerbaijan if the Americans were still playing this part? So we'll enter the world of the world of multilateralism, which is also a jumble. If the European environment blows up in Ukraine, Syria, in Libya, in Sahel, the Americans, even though Joe Biden is elected, they will not take care of that. So it's a new issue that is facing the Europeans. In a way, the risk is that, if Biden is elected, everybody will be in the same love of democracy and multilateralism, and the European will probably think that they are still living in their historical paradise. They will not maybe realize that the new world will be a world where strength is important. We will be faced up with the same kind of issue. So let's wait for the results of November 3rd or 4th. Obviously, the interest of France and of the world at large is the victory of Joe Biden. He will still implement U.S. foreign policy that will oscillate between the values of power, between values and power as usual. The U.S. are not different from others. They have their own interests and values and powers, but they share our values. If Trump is elected, it will be very different. We'll be faced up with chaos, and I must confess that everything will be impossible to forecast. Given the way our world goes, the humankind goes, and the world in which we are living. Last point, what about France? France has its part to play. It has its voice. We're trying to make our voice heard, and we need to do it in the European framework, but not only there. You've seen it in the Eastern Mediterranean. Our European partners have done nothing. France had to do something alone, but on a number of issues, we need to work with Europe, but beyond that, there is also the global framework. There are issues that have been raised during this forum that can only be addressed in the global framework, in particular everything that is related to the future of our planet. So peace is a combat, it's a fight, and I hope that this forum will help carry out this fight, which must be conducted not only by diplomats who are bad at keeping peace usually, but also with all citizens. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction. Preventing war and responding to new threats, this is the overall framework for our forum. Yesterday, we highlighted the different types of sufferings which are increasing the levels of conflicts in the world. Today, we'll dwell on the growing impact of technologies in wars. New technologies for the best of war. This is the title of this plenary session. In order to introduce this topic, we are going to listen to a woman that has been committed to our endeavor, Normandy for Peace, since the beginning. She was here as early as 2017, like our friend Bertrand Badi. I'd like to thank her for her daily commitment. She holds the chair of Europe at CNAM, the Conservatoire National des Arts et Métiers. She shares with us her very valuable international experience and is the scientific director of the forum with Bertrand Badi. Please give a warm welcome to Nicole Nesotto. Now, let me wash my hands, clean my hands. It's a ritual now. The microphones have been disinfected. Nicole, you have the floor. Good morning. Thank you very much, Frederic. Congratulations to the region. Congratulations, dear President, for defying COVID storms, the French railways, which is canceling trains one after the other because of the strong winds. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all of you to be here with us to try and think about the way we can prevent wars as much as possible and guarantee peace. Yesterday, we looked at things from the bottom. We looked at sufferings, social sufferings, suffering linked with health, environmental suffering. Now we are going to look at all this from the top and deal with the hopes that are lying in science and technological progress. Everybody knows that I'm a great expert in technologies. That's why I was interested with the opening of this session. I'm joking, of course. This is not at all my field of expertise. But I'm going to ask some questions as a lay person, as somebody who is candid on what we can expect from new technologies and scientific creativity in the years to come. First point, well, when we question new technologies and the warmongering or peaceful value of human inventions is as old as the world. Now, the invention of tools was very important, in particular the hoe to clear forests and make civilization progress, and it applies to all technologies. We can show their ambivalence. They can be tools for war or tools in favor of peace and the comfort of men and women. I'm going to mention 3 examples because I don't have enough time to list all these tools, but I think that after World War I and World War II, there were inventions that had a great impact on peace: penicillin, GPS, microwave ovens, etc., etc. So this ambivalence of technologies, that's an old story, and we still see it today. I can only take an example. Twitter was an incredible instrument used in the Arab revolutions and made it possible for all citizens to get involved and to mobilize and bypass security forces. But at the same time, we know that all these technologies are also terrible instruments to control societies. Now, it's a traditional question. Now, the answer is always the same to the question of whether technologies are factors of war or peace. Very often the answer is technologies are neutral. The difference lies in the use that men make of them. As early as the 16th century, this was true. Probably read Pantagruel by Rabelais, and he was writing, "Science without conscience is the ruin of the soul." And we find this answer in all scientific progress. I can quote, not Stephen Hawking, I can quote Einstein's comment on nuclear science. He was saying, "We've reached a point where our technologies overcome our humanity. The problem is not atomic energy as such, but the hearts of men." So traditionally, from a historical perspective, the answer is technologies are neutral. They can lead to war or peace. It all depends on the use made by men. The question is it still true today? With the appearance of artificial intelligence in particular, can we still say that the value of technology depends on the use we are making of them? Can we still say that human beings are still in control of their inventiveness? I'm taking the example of artificial intelligence because it's not at all sure that this new technology could be controlled by human beings totally, 100%, and that's when I want to quote Stephen Hawking. He says, "Such a form of intelligence could emancipate from human beings and improve its progress at a growing speed. Humans who are limited by their slow biological progress could not rival artificial intelligence." So it's a question, the first question I'd like to ask. Are we witnessing such a huge technological jump that it's calling into question the possibility for men to control what they are creating? Now, I'd like to come back to what we are calling war technologies, technologies that have been invented during wars. There are many of them, and as I said before, they very often lead to extraordinary innovations for civilian life, for the life of civil societies, in medicine and daily life, but they also transform war as such. And I'd like to mention 2 examples, because in a minute we'll have a debate on this. The first example is the invention of nuclear technology. Well, it's a very conflictual subject, but there are 2 conceptions regarding nuclear weapons. The first one says that it's a terrible, abominable weapon because it threatens the destruction of the whole of humankind. It's the dangerous and scandalous weapon by nature. And the second concept says, well, of course it's a dangerous weapon, but its specificity is that it threatens such a global and unbearable disaster that, of course, it deters anybody from starting a nuclear war. And the advocates of nuclear deterrence state that nuclear weapons are a fantastic weapon because they prevent nuclear war, because it's a horrible weapon and its horror prevents any nuclear war. And during the East-West confrontation, there were no wars between the US and the Soviets because of that. So that's a real issue, because here we are faced with a technology that is changing war and, in the views of some, is preventing war. So how can we consider this? Second, more recent discovery, digital and the internet, the revolution of communication and information technologies. These technologies have completely changed life, but these systems also change war, because they create a new war space, because so far we were waging war in four spaces: the atmospheric space, and of course land, sea and air. Now with cyberspace we've invented a fifth space for war, and maybe it will be the space of a major war in the 21st century. It will not be an ideological confrontation, but a confrontation between these new technologies. And we will have a second debate on that later on. The last point is about the latest technologies of the last 10 years, what we call disruptive technologies, which can really change the world in a positive or negative way. And you can have bitcoins, 3D printing, autonomous vehicles, advanced virtual realities, Internet of Things, genome sequencing, biotechnologies, and even more important, the interconnections between those technologies. In the future, the difficulty will not so much to think about the ethical control of these technologies, but the control of the interconnections between those technologies. And it leads me to my last two questions. The first one is about the relationship between these new disruptive technologies and democracy, and the issue of future governance on all this area of human creativity. Now, regarding democracy, and we'll hear another speech in a minute about that. Well, what information technology shows, but also other technologies, space technologies, that the public-private relationship is going upside down. Not only the states can control these new technologies and their positive and negative effects, but also private companies. We're thinking about the GAFAs, of course, Microsoft and others, but there are also private companies, SpaceX, Elon Musk, Virgin, private companies and their CEOs, which have a vision of the world which is not the common one, which is not the one supported by political ideologies even. And the question is whether we can accept those developments and change and maybe get rid of privacy, get rid of the notion of personal freedom, or of the notion of a minimum control over our personal data. It's a crucial question. Are we going to let those technologies change the kind of societies we've created centuries ago? Raymond Aron was saying, if man does not choose well, events choose on his behalf. And we could say the same about technologies. The last point is governance. What can we do to collectively govern all of us, not without China or Iran, for instance? How can we govern the use of these new technologies in one or several institutions. There are partial governance systems already on the nuclear, for instance. It's an imperfect system of governance. It's highly criticizable, but it exists. You have the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the interdiction, prohibition of ballistic missiles, etc., etc. But there is not yet a system of governance for cyber technologies or internet in general. No governance system to define how far we can go in manipulating the human genome or create armies with clones, and it's terribly urgent for our future. We want to preserve the legitimacy of science and our model of democratic society. And I'd give the last word with my master, Pierre Hassler, who was saying war is commonplace for women, but peace is an invention of men. And I think we should remember this message. Thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you very much, dear Nicole. So we will have you sit here at the desk because you will accompany us for a good part of this morning. You have just set the tone, and it's dizzying, everything that awaits us, all these technological stakes. And we really understand how you see the big picture, Nicole, and this has given rise to a work called Your Indispensable Europe. Very summarily, here you talk about the stakes in Europe, and it's the CNRS edition. Now, we will have three parts to this morning: protection of fundamental rights in the digital age, new forms of war with cyber defense, but also new generations of weapons, and the scientific dimension and ethical dimensions that accompany it. We had begun in 2019, in the spring of 2019, to broach these during a conference that was organized together with the magazine Ops, and it was at the chapel, and there was a cycle of conferences on France, and we talked about killer robots, about artificial intelligence, and this cycle of conferences led to the publication of a great series by Ops, a special edition, and it was considered the best special series of the year. And Dominique Nora, who is the director of edition for the editorial office of Ops, will be joining us this morning. Please give her a warm round of applause. So I do have the right to take my mask off right now. Do I use the microphone that's here? Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be among you this morning to moderate a series of panels to broach these three aspects of discussion for today. And I specify that this special edition is still being sold in newsstands. To start the debate, I will call upon Christiane Ferral-Schul, who is the president of the National Council of the Bar Associations. She will come and join us for this dialogue. So, good morning, Christiane. not only are you the president of the National Council of Bar Associations, but you are the former bâtonnier for Paris and a lawyer for the Bar of Paris and the Bar of Quebec. And you've been practicing for 30 years in the protection of personal data and in digital information. Now we will be talking about human rights, and you will tell me, because we had a preliminary discussion about to what extent there's a certain, let's say, feeling of being overwhelmed by the digital technologies. We won't be negative, but it's the access to technology, how technologies can be an obstacle to human rights and to equality. First of all, digital does accomplish some administrative tasks in justice. It's important to ensure that there's always access to judges for people. And what's very important in a trial is that time where there is this search for truth, a quest for truth. So everything's important in this unified part of the trial, a criminal proceeding where you've got the victim, you've got the accused. Even the silences are important. And behind a screen, when you dematerialize, when you shift to a video hearing, this quest for truth becomes complicated, because when you hear a lawyer pleading, behind the lawyer, there's the attitude of the other players, of the other lawyer, the lawyer for the civil party. And this is very important. All this is very important. And so when you add that, we, let's say, burst through this place of meeting where there's an interpreter somewhere else, and then the judge yet elsewhere, the lawyer in a third place, you can just imagine that this, this whole idea of a dematerialized hearing, what's the issue here? Well, even last year, there was an amendment to generalize video hearings. Through the sanitary crisis, there was strong incitation, motivation to shift to using video hearings and using digital technologies. But where do we stop within this mechanism? And there's another element I want to add. When we go into open data means we have the opportunity to access all judicial decisions. In itself, it's magic. It enables us to go and search for the background, for the history, but there are two major difficulties. There are several, but two major ones. The first, when today you have, let's say, expertise or an experience of 20 to 30 years, you have the capacity to say that jurisprudence is against me, is against the entrance of the case that I'm defending for my client. But the context has changed, because there are arguments that have led to a change in the jurisprudence. So it's my duty to inform the client that there is this jurisprudence that works against him or her, but then to explain that you can use this strategy to turn things around. And that's what it means to turn around jurisprudence. So what's the first major risk? Well, young magistrates, young lawyers, not be trained to carry out this critical analysis. So we think that, okay, we've got this jurisprudence and that's it. There's no way around it. Second element is that algorithmic processing has biases. A judge makes a decision with his or her culture, history, education, whether it be a man or a woman, won't necessarily have the same decisions. We don't always get the same results. So what can happen? Well, these biases can become definitively enshrined, etched, if you will. Let's say on, let's say, bodily prejudice. For a woman will evaluate that prejudice on, for example, a loss of salary. We know that women are not paid as much as men. And if this bias is not corrected, then this inequality will persist. So perhaps we can get to a solution. During our discussion earlier, you had talked about robot judges. Does this really exist? There's no human intervention in judging? Well, this is something that's been evacuated in France because in the law on the reform of justice, we said that a decision cannot only be based on an algorithm, an algorithmic processing. But a robot judge does exist in Estonia for, let's say, up to 7,000 euros. If there is a claim, a robot judge can do this. And with exchanges with the Minister of Justice, I asked, well, when could this be used? Let's say if there's a 7,000 euro claim at stake, that could be possible. But what I'm saying is that a human judge and human lawyer can fully understand that when a person has contracted a debt of 7,000 euros, the circumstances can be discussed. If there was some kind of a power struggle, and perhaps the situation of the debtor could justify a certain time frame, and that could have an impact on the decision taken. So yes, we have to be careful in not just to go into this 100% digital usage, but these algorithmic biases, can they somehow, like when we look at these algorithms, can we somehow do something about them, about the biases? Yes, if there's awareness. What we have proposed is that we entrust to an independent authority for the Court of Cassation, the CNIL. We want to, and also the State Council, we want a council that would be governing this area. That would be the first track. The second track would be to demand that all public offers that are made by this state involving justice would have specifications that define a certain number of ethical rules to be followed. The idea is not to communicate the sources or elements protected by know-how for the algorithm, but to ensure that, let's say, both men and women are looking at this to ensure diversity. So we want to take a certain number of precautions. These ethical rules, well, there is a charter of ethical rules which was adopted no later than last week in New Zealand. But in justice, the state has to be aware of these possible drifts. In our law, the rule of law always prevails. That is, when you have a law that is passed, it can retroactively quash previous ones, like the law of 1948 on rents. The rest disappears. And if you follow the reasoning of jurisprudence, then we shift into soft law. This is Anglo-Saxon type of regulation. So we would lose our continental type of law. So this is an element to take into consideration. On these issues which are important for human rights, is there work being done at a European level? You and your counterparts, do you discuss this? Because from one country to another, law is not the same. The laws are not identical. But is this being done country by country? Is there some consultation underway? Well, within the Council of Europe, there is a heightened awareness. We have ethical rules defined by the CEPEJ, which is under the umbrella of the Council of Europe. It's a committee that has defined ethical rules, and we call upon all countries, but especially France, because we are in contact with the French authorities on this point, to at least apply this minimum foundation of rules. Okay, I think we have a video of Rick Burrick, who is the Secretary General of the Council of Europe and who would like to address us on the protection of the democratization of the rule of law and human rights. Let's watch this video.
has also created new avenues for criminal behavior, cybercrime, which continues to drain billions of euros from our economies and expose citizens to harm. But our Convention on Cybercrime was again the first international treaty in this area, and it guides governments towards laws and cooperation that better protect their citizens. More recently, we have seen an old problem given new life. Hate speech has always been with us, but there can be no doubt that the Internet has handed a virtual megaphone to those who wish to bully, hurt, and intimidate. The Council of Europe has led awareness-raising campaigns and initiatives to counter it. But we know that this is not enough. New means must be found, and our new Committee on Anti-Discrimination, Diversity and Inclusion will look to develop a new and comprehensive legal instrument that will help European governments to achieve this. This is important because the digital era should be liberating. It must not be allowed to incubate suffering, anguish, or exclusion.
So perhaps I could ask that you react to this video, and Nicole perhaps would also have a word to say about it. Well, of course, there will be many things to say, but it's true that there are international instruments that are being set up. But what I think is important is the individual citizens' awareness. Because yes, you know, the way data is being made available to others, it's making people vulnerable. Do you think that we have to create some ethical big data or some kind of protection that is private or versus general interest? Well, there are two topics, in fact. There are the private actors who seem to be getting ahead of regulation, and they're talking about digital sovereignty. That in itself is a whole topic. And also, there is this need to learn to protect oneself. We are now in a society where you know, we often oppose security and freedom. And in the name of security or control that we might have, you've talked about drones, everything that's being set up that could make us secure. At the same time, we see a regression in terms of freedom, so we have to find a balance. Given what we have heard said, yes, there is cybercrime. There are new forms of violations, and we measure the limit of the tools that states have, and there's a need to be helped, you know, who are the private partners, but we must not give these people regalian powers of a judge. Nicole, thank you, Christian. I didn't know that there was any robot justice. I knew that there was a problem with these killer robots. We will talk about this later. That is, technologies which dehumanize the use that is made of them. Justice without people, a war without people. And this is a discussion that must be had. Where are we? Because technology is supposed to be the pinnacle of the intelligence of people, and this. But if it's dehumanizing, that is awful. The word algorithm has become the mantra of the economic and technological societies. We've seen in the crisis of 2008, we saw how bad algorithms can be because this was uncontrolled use of algorithms for these very greedy traders on stock markets. This was totally out of control. So now we have algorithms in justice, and obviously we have some in military affairs. There will be some everywhere. Now the question is one of governance, because it's very good that the Council of Europe make conventions, but conventions are less than treaties. There's no binding obligation on the part of the users. Can we go from conventions to law? Yes, but it would suffice, as I said earlier, to ensure that during each public tender, there would be respect with compliance with ethical rules. In texts, we would have to ensure that algorithmic processing could not replace a judge. There has to be a level of that would be defined. So we have to go further. So it's a very refined adjustment regulation, one that must not stop at the principles. It has to very clearly reposition and set a limit to this dematerialization and the usage of digital technology. Yes, we could develop legal tech that's out of control, pushing parties to reach agreements that would explain to someone who's justiciable, a citizen, that they should accept the compensation by interlocutors who could be powerful people like banks, insurance companies, etc. Here, we see that there could be a loss of what is very important in a rule of law state, which is access to justice, to judges, and the right to a defense. And that's a fundamental right that must always be borne in mind in all texts that would be drafted. So yes, it's rising awareness at an international level that could be manifested in states according to the specific principles of a state. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for this sequence. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have learned some things. I think many of us were unaware of these robot judges. This is a bit creepy. And to prepare for this forum, together with Hervé Morin, we went to New York, to the headquarters of the United Nations, where we met the Deputy Secretary General, who is in charge of disarmament. I was almost cut off here. So when we read the papers, unfortunately, multilateralism is really struggling. So what can remain of an international strategy for disarmament when states are less and less inclined to sit at the same table? Indeed, Frédéric, given the discussion that will take place in a few moments, General Jean-Marc Gelila at the School of War and Jean-Louis Gigoret were interested in one issue. There were some limits. They couldn't be here, but we're delighted that Mrs. Izumi Nakamitsu will be meeting with us virtually.
Gentlemen, I am pleased to send this message to the Normandy World Peace Forum. The topic you are addressing has emerged as a core pillar of efforts by the United Nations in the field of disarmament. Secretary General Antonio Guterres recognized this in his 2018 Agenda for Disarmament. His agenda emphasizes that as the advances in science and technology continue to revolutionize human life, we must remain vigilant in our understanding of new and emerging weapon technologies that could imperil the security of future generations. Such technologies are increasingly straining existing legal, humanitarian, and ethical norms, non-proliferation, international stability, and peace and security. They are diversifying the tools of warfare and the ability of non-state actors to carry out attacks, including across international boundaries. They are also creating new risks relating to old technology, lowering barriers to access and opening new potential domains for conflict. The rapid pace of technological development is certainly a challenge to governmental regulatory frameworks and to multilateral processes. An existing multilateral dialogue is still absent, slow, or defunct on key issues. Yet it is important to acknowledge that the most critical aspects of new weapon technologies are actively being examined within the United Nations disarmament bodies. While all existing multilateral efforts should be accelerated, the United Nations is playing and should continue to play a central role. One of the foremost reasons for this is the simple fact that reaching effective solutions to these challenges is beyond the capacity of any one state or even a small group of like-minded states to address on their own. This situation is very different than legacy threats such as nuclear weapons, which remain a problem centered on a small number of states. Emerging technologies can diffuse very rapidly around the world, accessible even to non-state actors. Many developments are now being driven by innovations in the private sector, as we see in areas ranging from artificial intelligence to new capabilities in outer space. The availability of enabling technologies can allow a broad range of actors to adapt commercial off-the-shelf items and use them for military purposes, as we have seen with armed drones. Digital technologies are present everywhere, but determining attribution and responsibility for attack is a serious challenge, even for the most sophisticated actors. Multilateralism therefore remains central to finding effective solutions to each of these issues. Fortunately, over many decades, the United Nations has developed many tools in its disarmament toolkit that can be relied upon. First, we can promote and facilitate greater understanding of emerging technologies and the challenges they pose. Since 2018, my office has published an annual report on developments in science and technology and their potential impact on disarmament and international security. The United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research hosts annual conferences on outer space, technological innovation, and cyber stability. At a more practical level, we are working with various partners to facilitate the sharing of information and development of best practice for the reviews that all states must undertake to ensure new weapons they seek to acquire comply with international law. Second, the United Nations remains the foremost venue for the development of global norms and measures. We're currently supporting active intergovernmental processes in several critical areas. This includes promoting and possibly further developing the normative framework of responsible behavior in cyberspace, implementing transparency and confidence building measures in outer space activities, and addressing emerging technologies in the areas of lethal autonomous weapon systems. I have recently published an op-ed article outlining several different tracks where the United Nations can reinvigorate international efforts to control missiles. This includes gradually expanding participation in strategic arms control talks, dealing with destabilizing new capabilities like hypersonic weapons and terrestrial-launched anti-satellite missiles, and strengthening norms at the regional level. We also continue to support efforts by member states to pursue multilateral talks on increasing transparency, accountability, and oversight over the use and possession of armed drones. Third, our convening power makes the United Nations ideally suited for facilitating multi-stakeholder engagement. We have facilitated the engagement of the private sector, academia, and civil society in all intergovernmental processes I have mentioned. And through outreach to young people, like our newly inaugurated Disarmament Youth Champions program, our work to encourage responsible innovation with students in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and math, and our Apps for Digital Peace competition, we are seeking to empower future generations to continue acting as a force for change. Finally, the good offices of the Secretary General are ready and available to help mitigate, prevent, and manage conflict stemming from malicious use of new technology, especially cyber activity committed across national boundaries. I hope this brief survey demonstrates that the United Nations remains not only vital and relevant, but indeed at the forefront of international efforts to deal with the challenges posed by emerging technologies. I thank you for your attention and wish you a productive discussion.
Alors, on voit que c'est
We understand that it's a very important issue for the United Nations. I'm going to call two experts of this issue of cyber war. First, General Jean-Marc Vigilant. His name is quite appropriate. We've seen that vigilance is crucial. And Jean-Louis Gergorin. General Jean-Marc Vigilant is an air marshal, fighter, pilot, 3,000 hours in flight, several war missions. He fought in Iraq and Djibouti. Was also the director of staff of the NATO transformation Allied Command, and is currently the director of the French War College and has the heavy duty of training future soldiers, youth, on these new areas of expertise. And Jean-Louis Gergorin, welcome Jean-Louis, started his career at the French Ministry for Foreign Affairs. He's currently a consultant. He had a long career in the defense industry at EADS in particular and Matra, and he's an expert in cyber war. It's such a vast subject that it's going to be difficult to address all the issues in 20 minutes. But I start by asking General Jean-Marc Vigilant how the progress in technologies and science is changing the environment of defense. Briefly, please. Thank you, Madam. Good morning to all of you. I'd like to start by talking about the change in our strategic environment. Today, our strategic environment is defined by its great complexity, the impossibility to make forecasts, and its quick development in all areas, political, economics, social, environmental, or technological areas. Open conflicts represent a security challenge, hybrid threats, and we also have a new balance of powers in the international area. And there were three traditional physical areas for war, the sea, land, and the air. And now there are three new areas of confrontation, and this represents new opportunities to make conflicts hybrid. I'm talking about the exo-atmospheric space, cyberspace, and the field of information. They were initially considered as force multiplicators. Now these immaterial areas have become gray areas. They're not fully at peace or fully at war, and in them it is possible to carry out devastating actions. These in-depth, these deep trends are increased by the acceleration of technological developments, of an easier access, including for non-state actors, to these new technologies. But this progress, of course, represents risk, but they also offer opportunities. I see two deep trends emerging nowadays. The first one is the end of the technological superiority of the West and of its armed forces, and its corollaries that the defense industries are not driving innovation any longer. And the second one is the emergence of data as one of the two main strategic resources in the 21st century. The second one is the human capital. I could give you more details later on, but generally speaking, regarding war, I see that the escalation in gray areas that I mentioned earlier on could very well lead to a high-intensity conflicts, and based on the theory of General Both, they would intensify competition, confrontation, and contestation. It's quite likely, and our responsibility is to be prepared for that, because the consequences would be disastrous. Thank you very much, General Jean-Louis Gergorin. Now, thank you, General. You did a great presentation. You published a book called Cyber, the Permanent War, so you've been an expert in these issues for a long time. And for you, digital is really a technological breakthrough and a factor of strategic disruption. Yes, it is. Digital is a factor of strategic disruption because it has an impact on international relations, but most of this impact is taking place in peace times. In fact, that's very important to understand, because you have the attenuation or even the disappearance of borders, the borders that used to exist between war and peace. We see in all conflicts that, war is becoming hybrid. Confrontations, intimidation actions, including between allies or between several European countries, France and Turkey, for instance, recently, show that there is no clear zone between war and peace. Could you remove your mask, please, Jean-Louis? We don't hear you well. So digital makes this much more possible. And digital makes it possible to change the balance of powers in two main ways. First, through the intrusion of IT, which makes it possible to intimidate, to neutralize some facilities, or to threaten to do it. And to give you an example, something was revealed by Guillaume Poupard, the boss of the French Cybersecurity and Cyber Defense Agency, ANSI. He saw that in more and more Western countries, there are implants that are used. They are time bombs, software time bombs that can paralyze facilities, in particular energy-related facilities, where this was revealed by Mr. Poupard, but the US, Germany also published articles on that. So the message that is conveyed by the powers is, I could cut your power when I want. I'm not going to do it, but I can do it. There were precedents in Ukraine in particular. There were major powwows in 2015 and 16 in Ukraine. So this is the first element in this change in the balance of power, which is IT intrusion. The second one is the manipulation of digital information. It's spectacular. You all know the importance of social media. During electoral campaigns, the Electoral Committee, the CSA, that's the audiovisual control body, and they really calculate the speaking time of all our politicians on radios and televisions, but there is nobody having any control, no organization controlling what is going on the social media, and they have a great deal of influence. There are strategies of influence that have been developed by some countries, Russia and even China. When China was blamed for its initial management of the COVID-19 crisis, all the countries that blamed it by simply asking the World Health Investigation to make an investigation, and well, we still don't know exactly what led to the propagation of COVID-19. Well, it was a natural origin. There might have been mistakes or incomplete information, and a number of Western governments asked for more information. But immediately there were IT attacks, there was intrusion. That was just a sign. In the past, we would send a diplomatic letter. Now, that's not what we do. A country that is not happy organizes a cyber attack, but there's never any proof. So there was an attack against the hospitals in Paris in March, when France started modestly asking to look at things. And there are also campaigns on the social networks. It was alluded that the Pasteur Institute created that famous laboratory in China. Whatever. It's the war of information. So it's absolutely essential that our strategy should cover peacetime. And IT intrusions, and not only protect but also deter. And we should not let the social media self-regulate themselves, because otherwise we would be too much dependent on them. I'm going to quote current chief of staff that is currently in office, General Gerasimov. He published a prophetical article in 2013. He was denouncing the Western interference based on propaganda and economic sanctions, and he was saying there are great capacities for asymmetric response, in particular in the digital field. And I think that General Gerasimov was only announcing what we are seeing happen today. Well, you really made us very much afraid, General. you're saying that even in peacetime, we're at war with, including with some of our allies. Now, how did France adapt its defense system to these new technologies? Well, in this uncertain world, the only certainty is that we will be surprised. So in order to face up to surprise, we need to use innovation. The Ministry of the Armed Forces in France in September 2018 has created an agency for defense innovation to capture innovation, which today, as I said, does not lie in the defense industry, in the traditional groups any longer, but rather in startups, in industries involved in information technologies. And these companies, startups or GAFAs, are not so much interested in defense. So we have to go towards them to set up more reactive and quick processes to fund innovation and obtain them for armed forces. Our ministry also took into account the arrival of new fields of confrontation. We created a command of cyber defense in 2016, and we've ramped up our human capacities and our technical capacities as well. We created a space command in September 2019, and since September 11, 2020, the French Air Force has officially become the space and air force, so that we can also defend ourselves in space. All forces are developing very innovative weapon systems that are using the networking of capabilities. I was talking about the importance of data earlier on in our new societies and in our new world. Today we should not think any longer about replacing combat platforms, a ship, an aircraft or a tank by a more powerful one or with a better performance. What we need to do is to network existing and future military capabilities in order to be able to present various dilemmas to the opponent at the same time, either through kinetic actions with a bomb, for instance, to destroy a military target, or through non-kinetic or even non-lethal action. It's only by synchronizing all this and being as quick as possible that we'll be able to overcome our opponents. We need to develop, of course, the management of big databases. We need to train our artificial intelligence. Very soon in the battlefield, we'll see autonomous systems and artificial intelligence. France has clearly decided that man would remain in the loop as long as lethal force will be implemented. Well, that sets our minds at rest. I think that the Agency for Defense Innovation is using the books by writers of sci-fi to think about all this, because when you look at sci-fi, you see that there were very early ideas corresponding to what happened with cyber. So they could think about the weapons of tomorrow out of the box. Jean-Louis Grégoire, I think that you have recommendations based regarding what the UN Security Council could take one step further in the field of cyber. Well, first there is the national level. And following what I said before, I'd like to add that a great effort was made by France in the field of cyber since 2008 and the white paper that we issued at that time with the creation of the French Cyber Defense Agency and Cyber Security Agency. And we created the Cyber Defense Command, and then second step, we strengthened up the Electronic Intelligence Agency. I don't think that this is enough nowadays to face up to the new challenges, which are spectacular. I think that we don't feel mobilized enough. You all read in the press a number of articles on the ransom software. The software is unlocked only against a ransom. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's symbolic. Now, that's very simple. Between 2017 and 19, the number of those attacks has quadrupled in 2 years. And if you look at ANSI's report, in the first half of 2020, this figure has doubled compared with the first half of 2019. So we have an increase between 1 and 8 between 2018 and 2020. A large part of this ransom software are used against companies or public infrastructure, and they are used by cyber crime. For example, there was TA-505 that paralyzed the hospital in Rouen, in Normandy. We know where they are, these groups. There is a country in particular east of Europe. There are cyber criminal groups in great authoritarian countries that can control them. It's a geopolitical problem. There is no single vision regarding response to that or deterrence. And to fight this intimidation. That's why with two colleagues, Admiral Edouard Guillot, the French Chief of Staff, and Bernard Bardier, the former director of the French intelligence services, we published an article recently in Le Monde to request two things. First, for the development of a doctrine for the deterrence of these attacks that are targeting civilian infrastructure, which is not covered by the IT defense doctrine of the armed forces. The defense code covers that, but not doctrine, and that's important in terms of deterrence. And second, we were requesting a high-level coordination in the state with the chief of the Joint Staff involved regarding anything that has to do cyber, because nowadays it is as important as nuclear deterrence. It's another element, but in peacetime it's a major element. Now, to answer your question, we need to come out of the law of the jungle. Cyber is the only global infrastructure. Internet is the only global infrastructure that has no organization in charge of regulating its security. It is as if public health did not have the World Health Organization. We know Trump wants to do without it, but we see how vital it is. An organization for global telecommunications has a control structure. Now, we need that for cyber. There are lengthy discussions at the UN and they don't lead anywhere. It's a problem that the great powers need to tackle. President Macron had this idea of a meeting about this between the Security Council permanent members to set up an international organization for cyber security. Otherwise, things are going to end very badly, because someday we'll have a digital pandemic like COVID and nobody will be able to control it, and it will have been caused by the fact that the powers will not have been prudent. Now, Jean-Marc Vigilant is going to conclude. Now, I just wanted to follow up on what you said. We need deterrence in cyber. But what's important is not so much the means that are used to attack an infrastructure, whether it's civilian or not. It's the effect on the target. And based on the effect on a national target, we'll be able to use all the range of our response resources. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, gentlemen. We talked a lot about scientific innovations that can indeed lead to the worst. Science and culture are part of areas of reflection at Normandy for Peace. We're going to come back to the scientific dimension later on, but there is also the cultural dimension that is very important. And Frédéric, yesterday you talked about the exhibition of pictures on famous handshakes in partnership with Paris Match. There's another exhibition of photographs in the village of for Peace in the framework of the festival. Women are exposing themselves. It's photographs of war. The title is Hope in the Middle of Ruins, and I encourage you to go and look at them. Well, we can also mention literature. In addition to photography, we have nights and an exceptional evening tonight dedicated to writers and peace. So please attend this literary evening in great numbers. It will be moderated by Mr. Garcin. We'll hear Jean-Christophe Ruffin, the famous Bartabas, and others. Everything is mentioned in the program. We hope you'll be coming. And it's organized by LOPS. Now, dear Dominique, you are in charge again. We are going to move to science and ethics. Now I'm going to call to the stage to talk about science and the ethics of scientific progress. Gabriel Ramos, Deputy Director for Social and Human Science at UNESCO. She's in charge of creating peaceful and inclusive societies. And Frédéric Bordy, Director of Accelerators and Technology at CERN, is an expert in the technologies of power converters and particle accelerators. I hope we won't get too much into details, otherwise nobody will understand. Welcome. Welcome to both of you. Maybe I'll start by asking Frédéric Bordy, because we prepared this interview, and I thought that he was probably the most optimistic speakers amongst those that I talked with. But it's true that our previous discussions were quite alarming. So I'll ask him to explain to us how science and fundamental basic research, it's your area, is a factor of peace. Thank you. Well, yes, I'm an optimist, sorry. To paraphrase Hobbes, I'm not an optimist of combat, but of action, and also of combat, of fight. First, I'd like to talk about science. I'm going to introduce my organization, CERN, the European Center for Nuclear Research. That's where I'd like to start my talk and explain how through projects we can federate science in favor of peace. Now it's an intergovernmental organization that was set up in 1954 for the youngest. Well, in 1954 we were 9 years after the Nazi barbarity and destruction. So how could our founding fathers could put around the table all these countries, France, Germany, the UK, Belgium, etc., to pool all these resources to do research in Europe? I think it was a very nice project. Now, our project was to work in the field of high energy physics, and for this you need to develop technologies, computing, accelerators. Now, everybody in this room knows that the web was born at CERN. The web was born at CERN. It was a product of basic research. It was a product of the work done by a European research organization. So we could wonder why the GAFAs are not European, why they escaped from Europe. Now we could talk to politicians about that, but the researchers created that technology. There's also software, smartphones, artificial intelligence, but there is also the program in green tech. It's a wider problem, energy related to climate change. So it's very important, I think, for science to develop technologies to help solve this problem, which is, in my view, the most important issue nowadays, climate change now. We would not have smartphones or computers without energy. So a number of things are coming from basic research. I'm thinking about high yield solar panels, systems that can transport energy with very low losses. Also the idea of transforming radioactive waste to reduce their volume, other energies based on thorium or other aspects. Now, ideas are individual, but innovation is collective, and for many years now, CERN has tried to implement all this, but we need a crucial ingredient, which is man. So we need to train generations of engineers and technicians to develop these technologies based on science. Now, could you give practical examples of cooperation to develop science, to use science for development purposes? Now, CERN's convention has been registered with UNESCO. There is the SESAM project. Do you know it? It's a project involving a source of light. It's like the CERN project in Paris. It's a project involving accelerators where you create light sources to do applied research in the field of medicine on different materials. Now, there's another project. The convention is also registered with UNESCO. It connects it involves countries like Cyprus, Egypt, Pakistan, the Palestinian Authority, Israel, and around the project to build an accelerator and light sources and do research together. Those countries usually do not have very romantic relations, but they can work together around such a project. It was inaugurated at UNESCO in 2017.
A second project now underway, supported by the European Union, will be one of agrotherapy using proton or carbon beams to treat cancer. We've got the Balkans, Albania, Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, Macedonia, to have cancer treatment developed. And I think that it is together that we're working on science for peace. I see that you're really exerting intense psychological pressure on me. No, it's just that I wanted to give the floor to Gabriella. Science for me is universal language, and I'm thinking of art. I turn always to the brave. It's a universal language, just like science, and it's a neutral language. And I think that these are languages that can really build bridges among nations and cultures, because we all speak a common language. So science and technology don't bring peace. It's up to the people. It can contribute to this intercultural dialogue and promote peaceful cooperation. So when we talk about deep science and this type of cooperation, that's one thing. But when we implement things like artificial intelligence, which we spoke of at length today, I would now like to give the floor to Gabriela Ramos, who at UNESCO has specific proposals to make artificial intelligence ethical. So please explain the different aspects and proposals you have. Well, do you have a document that you're going to put together? Could you explain this? Thank you very much. What I would like to say is that I share Frédéric's optimism. I think of the potential of artificial intelligence. We are experiencing it now, for example, to control the pandemic, international cooperation to understand viruses, all of the tools that we have developed. This has been accelerated with COVID, and it holds a lot of promise, but we're at a peace forum. We have to think about all the negative aspects of this area. I've been at UNESCO for now 3 months. I was at the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and I want to say that, yes, the principles of the OECD are very strong, but we could not pronounce the word ethical at the OECD because, well, I said, why are we not dealing with the ethical aspects? Because we talk about transparency, responsibility, we talk about trustworthiness, which has been invented in order not to mention ethics, because some countries believe that ethics has no place there. I am happy to see our ambassador from France, because in UNESCO we talk about ethics. It's just what you have said. A discussion about how technology, or will technology, contribute to human rights, human dignity, and so starting from values. Well, we're going to state values, but we can't even state values. I can't operate like that. So at UNESCO, with the support of member states who asked for this in 2019, because for I think 20, 30 years, UNESCO has been thinking about the ethical issues related to science. With the Genome Project, we started discussing this. There are experiments being conducted on the genome, so that's genetic manipulation. So what about artificial intelligence? How can we ensure in all the cycles of artificial intelligence, there's the design, research, development, we have to maintain this idea. Is this contributing to development? Is it contributing to peace? We made a recommendation that we sent to member states, and I really hope that negotiations will produce something. So we have all the human values, but we don't stop there. We have principles to apply these values. Transparency, responsibility, accountability. We talk about building laws, and in the analogous world, we have, everyone doing things in their corner, the Europeans, the Americans, they have their own standards, so we need an international standard. And then there's proportionality, security, equity, fairness. 200 companies throughout the world are producing 67% of all technology being built in artificial intelligence. And for whom? Mainly for people in the north. So where's the diversity? Where's the cultural richness? Where is the recognition? If I could allow myself to ask a question about this laudable initiative, this is being sent to member states, but this is essentially controlled by two main multinationals, American or Chinese, and perhaps even these states cannot impose anything, or perhaps the states don't want to impose something on these big companies. So how do we take back control? I think the speed with which regulation is operating at, it's always at least one step behind technological developments. Well, I think that reality will make it such that we'll have to do this. We've seen that there were the GDPR's protection of data in Europe. People were saying, oh, this is very restrictive. This is going to kill innovation. It's always a balance that has to be struck. If the regulation is exaggerated, we will limit innovation. But if we let innovation run wild, then we'll kill regulation. With COVID, I think we really did realize the importance of having strong regulation. Even in the United States, I think that there have been legal decisions taken to limit the actions of GAFA. But I think the problem stems from us users. When I go to new sites and I'm asked to read all the clauses and they ask us to agree, nobody will take the time to read all these things and to regulate to what extent my data can be absorbed by these companies. I think this awareness is beginning to come. I suggest you watch on Netflix a very good documentary, because Netflix, it's called Social Dilemma. It's all the designers of addictive applications of Netflix and Google. These are people repenting. They explain that they wanted to do good, but their design of addiction has led to terrible conclusions. Well, not just regulation. I think this is important in the regulations, in recommendations. We have a lot to say about the standards, but we need to have institutions. Catimini has published a report, Capgemini rather, saying that that these companies have to have a chief ethics officer. Somebody has to be looking at this, someone with experience, to see what's going on. Why is something being done? Because artificial intelligence always begins with a human definition or question. We ask the machines to do something to resolve human problems, even with the definition of the original question. That must be seen through the prism of ethics. We have to look at all of the infrastructure. And of course, the legal aspect is relevant. Nicole? This is a very interesting debate, because on the one hand, our suspicion of technologies and applications must not be total distrust and suspicion in science. I like what Mr. Baudry said, because again, there's nothing more fascinating than human intelligence, and science must be encouraged to develop. We see how much it is an instrument of international cooperation, universality, agreements among countries who are political enemies. With COVID, we saw that there was all kinds of medical cooperation. Yes, but with the vaccine, there will be competition. Yes, but it won't be the scientists who will be fighting. It'll be the heads of state. So with all the high school students here, we have to encourage them if they want to become researchers and scientists, because we could perhaps find new technologies for peace, just to be used to achieve peace. Now, as what Jean-Louis Gergorin had said, with regard to applications of science and technology, the need to have multilateral control and governance, this is a major issue, as long as the governance does not get left to states. I am someone who wants not just interstate governance, but there have to be other actors when we talk about harmful use of networks without involving users. Otherwise, we're headed for dictatorship or total ruin. Einstein used to say, I don't know what the Third World War will look like, but what I do know is that the Fourth World will be used with stone and silex. And I think we have to avoid getting to that point. Frédéric Baudry, do you have any comments to add to this dialogue? Well, when you're asked to click and not agree, it takes a few seconds. Well, some are a bit tricky. It doesn't don't go to the tricky sites. I think it takes a few seconds. I do it systematically, and I think it's a good thing. I have looked through your convention. It's very interesting. Okay, there are certain countries we won't follow. I think what we have to do is to look at this convention. It's a good thing. It has to be spread into companies. At the CERN, my institute, we have been looking at that. As it was, it's important to look at this. Now, I want to react to what Nicole said. Yes, COVID was a perfect example of how we got the researchers to work together. Big data, petabyte. Again, that was just the beginning. What you're saying about the vaccine, that's another debate. It's a political one, but at least researchers did come together. And I can only encourage youth to become researchers, engineers, scientists. We need you. We need people in finance and in commerce, but if we're only there to sell products made in China, go toward the sciences and new technologies. Can I say one thing? I think that's a very good conclusion. We will stop there for this sequence, so I thank you very much. Thank you very much. You have opened up some very nice prospects that warm the heart. So we would ask that you step down and ask Nicole as well too. Very, very passionate and dizzying discussions. Frédéric Baudry, in his statement, well, we know we are familiar with the brave who have been with us since the beginning of Normandy for Peace. This is a sculpture that was erected on Omaha Beach, and it's Annie-Laure Bannon who, through her work, Annie-Laure Bannon, for several years, has been involved in this artistic project, which brings together the scientific challenge and an artistic side. It's called Vitae. It is to send a sculpture to the moon. It's a completely unreasonable project. That's why we like it, because somewhere it embodies all the values of utopia. And utopia has to remain in our hearts because the challenges we have to rise to are immense. Annie-Laure Bannon is among us, so we will welcome her here up on stage. Welcome, Annie-Laure. So, in a few words, we have just described Vitae, your project, to send a sculpture to the moon. Such a project must be very expensive. It must require a lot of means. So what scale are we talking about? I just wanted to say something which is important. This idea of the project is to bring mankind together. It's not just the idea of sending it to the moon. It's symbolically with millions of hands being involved, and to prove, as we've seen throughout these days, that today we can rise to the challenge. We have been following this project for a long time, and last year there were high-level personalities, some Nobel laureates. Yes. With this forum, Vitae has a nice story, and I feel at home here. So it's lovely to be able to share the progress of our project and to be involved in such fora on peace. So for Vitae, we did a lot of research and development. We sent the sculpture to the station, to the International Space Station, We went on SpaceX Falcon 9 and we tested it. And after that, we worked on studying what space players we could work with. In the US, we tested several companies, and it's with Nemesis, a French company. Nemesis Technology is the one that is going to make the sculpture that will go. Perhaps we could put up one or two images. This is the installation of the last sculpture made by Nemesis. So we are now at the point where we can book this flight to go, but you're not going into outer space. No, I'm very comfortable where I am, thank you. So we will be sending it, but of course, we need money for this because there will be scientific experiments heading for the moon. The next missions, the first in June, does not have the kilos available, so we have to go on the next one, so we have to do crowdfunding. If everyone gives just a bit, we will succeed in the spirit of this project for the final stage. So we will be launching crowdfunding at Christmas. So this crowdfunding, thank you for having reserved the launching of an application, which in a few hours or maybe a few days will enable anyone who wants to make a donation to make it possible for this sculpture to go to the moon. How will this application work? You just register your name and your email so you can get all the information, because of course there will be an exhibit on land to tell you register your hand. So for 10 euros you can register your hand, receive a certificate of participation and a digital work of art, which I will send to each person. But there are some people who don't have 10 euros. We thought of a solution. Those who could offer the hand of someone else, it's solidarity for those who can't. And I think that on the photo, the application will perhaps arrive, but perhaps if you want to send me your email, or if you want to give to me or to Jeanne your email, in the hours or days to come, we will send you a notification. So this is this premiere, so complying with these barrier tests, you will never look at the moon for the same, in the same way. So Normandy will symbolically be on the moon. Thank you very much, Annie-Laure. What a fantastic symbol in the throes of COVID, offering hands to go to the moon, since we can't shake hands. Frédéric, since the beginning of this forum yesterday, we have spoken of the different aspects of our piece that is for youth, science, culture, resources, and one which is very important is something very dear to the heart of Hervé Morin, president of the region, that is the peaceful dialogue, because we want the region to be a territory of dialogue. This forum is a format that brings points of view together. It helps them converge. We can look at what can be done apart from what's traditionally done. This is a work that's done, let's say, in the shadows. We call this track 2 diplomacy. It's a parallel diplomacy, not the traditional channels through various international bodies. Today, you will hear the testimony of someone who practices such diplomacy from London, or from the shadows, who participates in conflict settlement and helps to have converge opinions. Born in Qatar, but with a UK passport, and has worked for many years at the UN and has formed the Shai group, and they organize actions of mediation, especially in the Middle East. Please welcome Salman Shaikh. Good morning, Salman Shaikh. Please take place here, take a seat. Please take a seat. So, Salman Shaikh, you who knows from the inside the inner workings of diplomacy, what reasons led you to create your own organization, a non-profit organization? I would like to stipulate the Salman Shaikh group. On your site, you explain your mission, your ambition. I quote, promote practical initiatives that foster peace, tolerance, mutual security, and a shared economic prosperity. Can you explain this, please? I'm sorry, but I will be speaking in English.
French is not good enough for such an esteemed audience, even if my wife actually is a daughter of Britain, of Brittany and of France. I hope the next time to be able to speak to you in French. Let me say that our mission is very much a consequence of my own experience observing conflicts in the Middle East over the last 20 years. My wife and I, we were in Gaza through the Second Intifada. We were in Iraq. I was in Lebanon through the 2006 war. And of course, we have seen up front the horrors of war. By the way, one small correction. I was not born in Qatar. I was born in Pakistan. I'm originally Pakistani. I'm British.
Sorry about that.
No problem. And ironically, or maybe tellingly, I was born in the India-Pakistan War of 1970-71. What we realized, and I say we because it was a group of us that formed the Sheikh Group, some very brilliant young people who, with their own experience, wanted to come together. We wanted to democratize who's at the table when it comes to making peace. For far too long, we have observed that there is too narrow a group of representation when it comes to conflict making. For far too long, there has been also a tendency for us to try to see how we can bring solutions from the outside. So it's this inclusive approach of representation which is very important. So we work in Syria, in Iraq, in other places from the bottom up. That means trying to get the ideas of representatives, it's not the entire population, of particular communities of the population, and then to bring those ideas, especially when conflicts are internationalized, to the international community. So of course, Paris, France has been an important supporter of our work, as have a number of other European governments, like Sweden, like Germany, like the United Kingdom. And through that process, bottom up and top down, we think that there are better ways of moving forward in this track to space. And let me illustrate it finally by saying this. If there was a conflict, God forbid, in Normandy, I know you've seen some in the past, you would not just rely on the people of Rouen or Saint-Honorine or Caen. You would not rely on just those who own land or those in the business community. You would wish to involve all sectors of the population. And that is why it is very important when we look at the intractable conflicts of today that we find ways to do that in this case.
Salman Shaikh, on le voit, les relations internationales, elles sont...
In international relations, we see greater tension, there are more brutal conflicts, and we have tweet diplomacy going on. here, could we see this, the swan song of traditional diplomacy? Would this swan song mean that there is a place for parallel diplomacy and mediation?
We are at a time, and it has been going on for some time, as it's been observed by Ambassador here and amongst others, we're at a time where the international order is fraying and where the international system is paralyzed. This is something that we have observed, and in fact, in one of the dialogue tracks we have, which is bringing Americans and Chinese and Europeans and Europeans and Indians together, the main topic we've got is how great powers don't do any more harm when it comes to the Middle East at this point in time. But of course, formal diplomacy has a role to play. But because of the complexity of this time, there is a space for track 2 actors. We have to find every single little bit of space when it comes to solving conflict. And what can track 2 actors do? Well, we can build relationships. We can build relationships at a more intimate level with communities, with people on the ground. Secondly, we are not burdened by the official diplomacy that is often having to be more formal and more public. We can work informally. We can try to suggest ideas which are unencumbered by a particular organization or a particular country putting their name to such ideas. We can explore those ideas. And thirdly, we can think not just short term, we can think longer term. It's very important that we all realize that the transition from war to peace takes years. Often it can take decades. Our own experience in Europe has shown us that. It's no different when it comes to conflicts elsewhere. So what you do now and what ideas come forward, who you have, can have a much longer impact. If you try to build a peace agreement on 2 narrow, formal rules, often, and this is what the evidence shows us, they break down, which is again where track 2 can be useful.
Les sujets liés au Moyen-Orient sont plus qu'épineux.
Middle East topics are very thorny. I think you are focusing on the Syrian dossier. Can you tell us a few words about this?
Yes, of course. Tragically, Syria is now entering into its 10th year, 1 decade of conflict. I was 40 years of age. I was just heading the Brookings Institution in Doha, in Qatar. At the time, I'm now 50. This is how long some of us have been working on this conflict. And of course, we should never lose sight of the immeasurable human impact that this conflict has brought about. Syria today is a fragmented country. It is a country in different zones, some of it controlled by the Assad regime and its government, others which are as a result of opposition control, one of which is in northeast Syria, where we ourselves have been engaged now for a number of years in a dialogue that has sought to bring Kurds together with each other. And there are different political parties and ideologies, but also Kurds with the majority Arab population. This is painstaking work. We have been doing it for the last 2.5 years, along with others. And it illustrates what I said right at the start. You work with communities, you work with the representatives, you bring those ideas that they develop through dialogue to key international actors. And in the case of the Syrian northeast space, you have, of course, the United States military, you have the regime on the other side of the Euphrates River, you have the Iranians and their militias, and of course you have Russia and Turkey. Turkey, which has taken a part of that area. It's within that complexity, at the end of the day, where the ideas of Syrians, Arabs and Kurds must be brought to bear in order to find a solution. Syria overall needs, in my view, two things. One is an unwavering focus on the importance of international law. Syria is a warning to us all when we ignore, even from the outside, the enforcement of international law. There are more than 100,000 Syrians who have disappeared. We don't know where they are. Many of them are probably being tortured. Then we must also focus on finding ingenious solutions to the overall political process. And where you cannot work at the national level, you must work sub-regionally, and then you must try to bring the best of those efforts together, which is what the United Nations has been doing, but it shouldn't stop us from working, as I said, at a subnational level and trying to stabilize the areas that we can. Rebuilding and reconstruction, a point I'll make perhaps later on in another panel, it's not just about buildings, it's not just about pouring in money, it's about rebuilding the contract between the people and the state. And that is something which I believe is still possible in a great country like Syria.
Merci Salman Shaikh pour nous donner ces...
Thank you, Salman Shaikh, for this information on the very practical scope of your action. You are today in Normandy. Normandy would like to be able to contribute to make the different points of view closer. What is your perspective on this initiative taken by a region and not a state committing for peace?
It's wonderful. I want to congratulate Monsieur President and everyone who's made this possible. I'm used to speaking in conferences, but I must admit to you I have not spoken to one in about 8 months. And it's really a testimony to the hard work and effort of everybody here to make that happen. Look, we are in a different world now. We were already. COVID has thrown up what they call pre-existing conditions. It's also an opportunity. Diplomacy is done at different levels. Peacemaking has to be done at different levels. So whilst, of course, multilateralism and the arrangement and agreement between states is extremely important and ultimately the way to concretize or to establish peace, there is a role which I call multi-levelism. And that, of course, is where Normandy and its great forum and your efforts are so important. You know, just a few months back over the summer, my family and I, we went to those beaches in Normandy, around Bayeux and others, those cemeteries. We must never forget, and in this region, I know you don't forget, you are trying to build peace at every level. And can I just say one thing to the young people here and those who have been working on technology? This is another level. When I talk about democratizing peacemaking, it is not right that we spend so much of our resources, correctly often, for our national security on the instruments of war. We need to devote a lot more time, technological time, to making peace. A few years ago, I launched something related to Peace for Good, which was the use of technology in terms of how you can bring people to the table even if they cannot physically be there. Imagine a four-sided table. One side of that table is empty because we are not able to bring some of those community leaders, some of those people in Raqqa, for example, who were suffering under Daesh, under ISIS, to the table. Well, through COVID, we have been using remote technology, and in fact, we launched a San Francisco Peace Building League. We also tried to do the same around another peace forum, the Paris Peace Forum. And this is a challenge to us all to imagine a world whereby which we can bring people together, even if they are not physically there, where we can build empathy and understanding so that peace agreements and understandings can nevertheless be forged. And of course, COVID has taught us that we have no choice. We have to try and make progress on that. After all, wasn't it us imagining self-driving cars or flying cars or drones that actually made those possible? So let's imagine what are the tools for peace that we must try to work towards. And I'm sure we will get there, and it will be to the benefit of future generations.
Merci beaucoup, Salman Shaikh.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for what you are doing at the service of peace. You know that you are welcome to do it here in Normandy as well. If you want to know more about these new forms of diplomacy, let me tell you that this afternoon you'll be able to meet Salman Shaikh during a discussion called The Middle East, How to Rebuild Peace in Uncertain Circumstances, in partnership with UNPD. Still about mediation, and we talked about the diplomacy of states and of international organizations. We talked about more informal diplomacy. Now, there is an aspect we should not forget, which is the parliamentarian part of diplomacy, and I'd like to invite Catherine Morin-Desailly, President of Culture, Education and Communication in the Senate, and Thomas Friand, founder and CEO of Open Diplomacy. Catherine and Thomas, please take your seats. Catherine Morin-Desailly is a senator. She was re-elected brilliantly last Sunday. Thomas Friand founded Open Diplomacy, and for several months now, a dozen members of parliament from the 5 continents have been working remotely without meeting physically. This is what Salman Shaikh was saying, digital diplomacy, digital dialogue. Well, you just published the platform of parliamentarians for peace in partnership with the Normandy region and Normandy for Peace and Open Diplomacy. Maybe the first question I'd like to ask you, Thomas Friand, would be to tell us briefly what Open Diplomacy is. The name is very telling. Does it mean that usually it's closed? Thank you, François Xavier, for inviting me. I'm probably one of the most junior speakers, and I'm very much impressed, and I'd like to really thank Catherine Morin-Desailly, who trusted me enough to co-chair this work with her. Well, open diplomacy, well, diplo in Greece means the closed hand. So it's power, it's something you hold in your hand and that you hide. And opening this hand is taking action throughout the year, in particular with young people. It's like the philosophy fueling Normandy for Peace, not only the forum, but your whole initiative. It means being able to offer citizens access to the knowledge that is necessary to be able to act, and also to make it possible for them to commit themselves. There's no happy citizenship without being active and informed. And here I'm talking under the control of the outgoing president of the Media Commission in the Senate. We want to be a media that decodes international news. Well, we founded this 10 years ago when G20 was created, and this sends us back to the first topic we addressed, which is climate. Well, I'm about 30, and we know that our generation will not live in a stable world, but in a dangerous one. So we need to embrace this difficulty with a multilateral system, but also with the citizens. Well, Catherine Morin-Desailly, you are very active at the Senate, There are many parliamentary fora and international organizations that have a parliamentarian part. Yesterday, we were welcoming the Secretary General of the International Organization of Francophonie. They have a parliamentary assembly. Earlier on, we listened to the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, which also has a parliamentary assembly. There is an international interparliamentary union as well. But you took part in the setting up of this parliamentary platform for peace with dozens of MPs from different countries, and very important ones as well, because for Brazil, the former Minister of Culture from Brazil was there, MPs from South Africa, India, and many other countries, Senegal. We greet them all. They cannot be with us today, but we'd like to greet them. So maybe a provocative question to you. Does it mean that the international parliamentary tools or fora still have any use? Of course they do, but it's an institutional framework. In our respective parliaments, we have commissions for foreign affairs, commissions for European affairs. In most cases, we also have groups of friendship. In the Senate, I've been chairing the France-Egypt group for many years now, and we work on different subjects. We make parliamentary diplomacy progress. I'm working on water diplomacy right now with my colleagues. We are working on the problem of sharing the Nile waters right now. But we realize that maybe we need more unique, more original bodies to be more audacious, more creative, and to carry out a more in-depth and lasting work. That's why Thomas Friand's initiative is great, because it's going to help us set up a small group of MPs, a kind of embryo we've already been discussing for weeks, to identify the challenges that have been addressed by the Normandy for Peace Forum for the last 2 days. And these challenges are huge, so we need to rebuild multilateralism through this experience. Now, a dozen MPs from 5 continents working for weeks to create this basis and then have a snowball effect and attract other MPs from the rest of the world. This represents the first step in rebuilding multilateralism. So you created a platform which in a way reflects the Manifesto for Peace, which was signed here last week, and includes very practical subjects. It's not just one more declaration, it's actually an action plan. Now, there is a subject that is very dear to your heart, Catherine Morin-Desailly, Thomas Friand also addressed it. It's the global governance of the internet. What could be the use of your platform on this particular topic? Well, we can share the work of our national assemblies first, but we know that for this particular topic, but others as well, like the health crisis, well, these topics are addressed at global level because all this is interdependent. That's why multilateralism and work in partnership is absolutely unescapable. So we compare what our different national assemblies are doing. We realize that we can enact laws at another level regarding the internet. Addressing the GAFA cannot be done only by France or only by Europe, OECD, sorry. So we understand that we need to work together. Now we've set up a project based on 5 areas of action. Thomas is going to describe some of them. You were asking me about global governance of the internet. So what really impressed me this morning after listening carefully to other speakers is that all said that we were at a crossroads. Actually, we are on a line between the world of hyper-benevolence and hyper-oversight that the internet created. Now, do you remember Edgar Snowden, who revealed in 2013 that there was a general mass surveillance of people in the whole world, and that the internet was not the myth it was at the beginning, where, everything was very nice. We are in a new field of global confrontation. We are in a world which is midway between surveillance capitalism that was theorized by a Harvard professor, and the Chinese model of social credit, which is an authoritarian model, a model based on control. And we are caught between these two worlds. And we want to create a world of a sustainable and lasting internet that will share our democratic values. So we started reflecting together about this, and in our manifesto you'll find a proposal of drafting an international treaty, not necessarily under the UN, because not all member states share the same values and the way we should share those networks, but at least we should completely review the bodies that govern the internet. They are insufficient. The creator of the web said it himself. When it was revealed that with the complicity of Facebook, the Russians manipulated the American elections, and in the UK, in Parliament, the word mafia was even used. Well, all this reveals that we need to really do something about the governance of the internet and start regulating. It's part of our goals. Now, it's a very practical goal. It's the idea of doing parliamentary lobbying to create this missing new international instrument. Now, there are also topics about health, the environment, education that you are addressing, many other subjects as well, the fight against corruption, because we know that this has an impact on conflicts. You can find this document online on the Normandy for Peace website. Thomas Friand, in conclusion, of course this is not enough, so what's going to happen afterwards? Well, we are going to continue this work, which started based on a very simple principle: humility. We are humble. We have gathered together MPs that are not there just to talk. They have started from the Normandy Manifesto for Peace. They are using these values to take action. They want to think as men of action and act as men of thought. It's Bergson who said that now. And the principle of humility recognizes the principle of interdependence. It's like Catherine said, today, enacting laws means understanding that sometimes the conditions of use of an internet platform are more powerful than the law. Now, of course, what we are doing is a work plan to make progress, to federate the civil society, the electors of Catherine Morin-Desailly, of our Brazilian colleague, of Philippa Woodford in Scotland, of somebody else in Lebanon, gather together all citizens to try and do something at the political level in this multilateral system, which is hurt by the willingness of some powers to do away with multilateralism. And we recognize that laws are not completely enough today, and that we need maybe to reinvent the laws, but not reinvent the wheel, not reinvent past words. Gabriela Ramos was here before, has worked at OECD, now she works at UNESCO, and she's working on an ethical artificial intelligence. We're not going to reinvent UNESCO's work. We are going to recognize amongst ourselves the work done by UNESCO, to support them and to confront the United States that decided to deprive them from 25% of their budget. Now, when we vote the finance law, I hope that the MPs will say, well, UNESCO was deprived of 25% of its resources to talk about ethics. Now we'll do this work, and there are about 20 projects based on these 5 great or major areas, and that correspond to the concerns expressed in the Forum's manifesto last year. And all the young people who are here at Normandy for Peace tell us every day future generations need a strong multilateralism, otherwise we'll have a dead multilateralism. Now, I seize this opportunity to invite MPs in the whole world to embrace this platform, to make it bigger, and to make sure that your ideas and your proposals will be discussed publicly, because parliamentary diplomacy is the democracy of diplomacy. Thank you very much for your work, dear Catherine and dear Thomas. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the most vulnerable are very often the first victims of conflicts and wars, and the primary ones are children. Since the Normandy Forum for Peace attaches specific attention to the fate of children, this year we wanted to welcome an international program called Child Rights in Action. This program was initiated in 2012 by NGO Initiative and Change, represented in about 60 countries in the world. There is a very simple fact at the origin of this program. The voices of children are choked in TV news, in articles in the press. It is very rare that they should be interviewed. It is high time to start listening to them and to discover their realities with their words. Child Rights in Action is based on a powerful idea, which is that we need to act not only for children, but with children. In spite of the ratification of the International Convention of Children's Rights by a majority of countries, the situation remains more than worrying. Thanks to a very unique operating mode, Child Rights in Action sets up an approach to enable children to become players in change and activists for peace. Since last afternoon, we've organized a workshop in our village, and now there are a real human library in which books are alive. This makes it possible to read the history, the stories of those children with an open heart. A dozen of witnesses, either children or adults having gone through conflicts when they were children, are telling us their stories one by one in front of small groups of about 10 people. Adults play the role of librarians, as it were, and orchestrate this dialogue. These stories, because they are embodied, give another dimension to these complex realities. Children from Cambodia, Afghanistan, Sudan, and Rwanda and other countries have come specially to speak. There are also French children that, in spite of themselves, were embarked in the tragedies of jihad. Amongst these witnesses, there's a young Tunisian who is 15 and accepted to testify in front of us. He's very scared. He's shaking all over. So please give him a very warm welcome. Let's welcome together Youssef Mejri. Thank you, Youssef. Could you put the microphone closer to your mouth, please? Yes, of course. Now, could you tell us how it is important for you to participate in this human library and to become yourself a live book? Well, I was very excited to participate in the Normandy Forum for Peace because I wanted to share my personal experience and get to know people from other countries and make my voice heard. It is the voice of childhood, and really reach out to people and politicians as well and warn them about the fate of children, which is very often ignored. They are the main victims of conflicts, and we need to hear them talk, listen to them. Well, you were very motivated because when you go back to Tunisia, you'll have to be put in quarantine. Yes, absolutely. So can you tell us your story? Well, I'm 15. I lived through the Tunisian revolution in 2011 when I was 5 or 6. The revolution started when somebody selling fruit in the center of the country had his goods seized by a guard of the town, and he set himself on fire. And the young people started demonstrating and rioting, mainly unemployed young people who were asking for their rights to have a job, to enjoy dignity and equality, equal opportunities, and the movement spread to the whole country and other countries as well and started the Arab Spring. So you were 5 or 6, you did not understand much. Yes, absolutely, I did not understand much about what was going on, but I remember that school stopped for more than 1 month, and my parents stopped going to work for security reasons. It was not safe. I could see that everybody was afraid, but I could not understand why. I was a child. I did not understand the situation. And I remember hearing shots, gunshots. There was a curfew. We were afraid to go out. And I remember on my 6th birthday, it was on January the 10th, and I was expecting a party, but there was no party. And I was disappointed, of course. I was sad. I did not understand why I couldn't have a birthday party. There were no gifts, no cake. And yes, absolutely, you wondered what was going on. Yes. And my father, he dared to go out and buy a cake and improvise a party. That's very nice. Your mother, who is here, well, she told us how on that evening when you were celebrating your 6th birthday, when they saw your anger and your sadness, they understood how important it was for you. So your father, braved the curfew to go and find a cake for your birthday. It was a special moment. And then time elapsed, yes, and there were riots and demonstrations. Many demonstrations and different attacks after the revolution, and I was nearby during 2 attacks. One when I was going back home one evening with my father and my brothers. We walked along an avenue where 15 minutes later a kamikaze blew himself up near a bus in which there were some presidential guards. That was in 2015. And in March 2020, or rather that year, I was going back home and I was going to the bus stop, and I passed the US Embassy half an hour before 2 Islamist kamikazes blew themselves up as well in front of the American Embassy. So you really feel unsafe because all this is impossible to plan. I mean, it's unexpected. So you were twice near an attack, and of course this increases your fear. Yes, of course, but you have to continue living. It doesn't last. You learn how to live with this, and since the revolution, I see more bearded men and women veiled in black who are Islamists and have a very radical idea or concept of Islam. And personally, I think, well, I'm a Muslim, but I don't share their ideas. I don't share their principles because radical Islam is something that is dangerous, and it's not the kind of Islam we have been used to in Tunisia because we are a moderate Muslim country.
So during these workshops of human libraries, you make drawings, and you have made a drawing. We see it here in the photo. What did you draw here? This is a symbol of Tunisia. It wants to go toward the sun, toward freedom, progress, and everything, and it is handcuffed by clouds. It is the fear. Poverty increased during the revolution, and so did unemployment. Crime as well was on the rise. So we're seeing a deterioration in public services, schools, and some hospitals that are in bad shape. The quality of teaching has deteriorated. So more people are going to private schools or private clinics for healthcare. So you have to pay money to go to these private institutions, and this is further exacerbating inequalities because many people don't have the means to get proper healthcare or get proper education. There is this paradox that this Tunisian revolution, as you so well explained, began with social anger and unemployed youth. You're only 15, but the situation has not really made any headway, especially in terms of youth unemployment. There has been a lot of improvement. We've set up a democratic system, and Tunisia has done the best in all of the countries that went through Arab Spring. Hervé Morin reacted directly to that, saying thanks to women. I don't know if everyone heard that, but he said thanks to women. So freedom of press, of what's written, multi-party system. In 2015, our country was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize because it was through dialogue that we were able to make this transition. Problems persist, and I hope that when we get past them, our country will develop, because we do have political parties that are not always in agreement with each other. They're always seeking to advance their proper interests, and they don't have a common vision of Tunisia's future. So we really do hope that our country will begin to develop in the near future. To have a better idea of the diversity of the themes broached in these workshops, there are two more drawings. Gianyara's drawing, she's a Syrian Kurd, she's 14, and if you see, this is the face of a woman whose mouth is taped shut, so there's no comment. And then there's Emmanuel's drawing, who's now an adult, but in this drawing was 7 in Rwanda. He's there coming to among corpses. He doesn't know if he's a Hutu or a Tutsi. The only thing he wants to know is, well, the question he's asking, where do I hide? Yusuf, for someone who was stressed to address this audience, I think you have been extraordinary. And I want to thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yusuf. You did a great job. If you would like to go further on this topic, one of the topics is to be discussed is children, their childhood in conflict, and there'll be the High Commissariat for Refugees and Jonathan Levy, who is the one in charge of the pedagogical aspect of the program Child Rights in Action. Last 8 August, some Nigerians and some French people were killed brutally in Niger. Some were humanitarian actors and workers working in countries that are affected by natural disasters or conflicts. This tragedy has upset all of us, and to honor the courage of these men and women who don't withdraw in the face of the challenges faced in these countries, we would like to welcome here up on the stage this person accompanied by the President Hermé Meurant. So it's Frédéric de Saint-Semé. Welcome up here on the stage. Come here to the middle. So I thank you so much, dear Frédéric, for having agreed to come up on stage. I thank you for your invitation. ACTED has been struck. This is very tough. And what was the mission of these humanitarian workers? This was a terrible drama for us, for the families, but for the entire humanitarian community. It's the worst drama to have struck this community since the existence of the humanitarian commitments that we took. We will remember the French doctors who at the time, over 50 years ago, French ONGs, or NGOs rather, have been going there and working in the field. We were not expecting this. We work in very difficult conditions in countries, which you have just said, are in conflicts. Our main framework is Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, and the DRC. Only difficult countries. And if we ever work in Yusuf's country, it's in development programs. So these are in the most remote areas, among the most underprivileged and abandoned people. There are no public services. There are failed states sometimes. So humanitarian workers are essential for the survival of these dozens of millions of people. And those who are working to support these people, to really implement these programs, are local humanitarian actors. We have 200 local employees, and we have some international ones. We have 7,000 employees, 400 international workers. We have about 20. We had about 20 when this drama took place. And the terrible irony of the story is that this happened in a place where the risks for security are not fundamental, whereas we're working in the most remote areas in the capital of Niamey, and we've never, ever had the least little security incident. So it had to happen in this area where expats who regularly came Niamey. So it's a drama of, it's a feeling of terrible injustice. We're horrified. These people were between 25 and 30 years old, and around 50 for the Nigerians. They were just beginning their lives, their professional lives. They were very committed, and they were not able to leave Niamey due to COVID for a few months. So that was just their first time leaving to get a change of scenery. So there was a need for us to talk. We stopped our programs. We are supported by major international institutions, the UN, the EU. We have suspended our programs to discuss things with our teams. I went to the field. We talked to Nigerian psychologists, French psychologists, and for 3 weeks we had an exchange on what they were feeling, and also to see how we could continue to work there. And our team, after 3 weeks, wanted to resume work again for the people there in conditions that are difficult. Obviously, the conditions are difficult, and we resumed work in other countries of the Sahel, because we often talk about interventions in a given country, but you know, the borders don't necessarily have much meaning. We have cross-border, trans-regional programs, and all humanitarian actors working in the Sahel felt concerned by what happened. So we really needed that time for compassion, to have a discussion with the humanitarian workers altogether. They are not robots. They are very altruistic, generous people who give a great deal. And when you're struck by this kind of drama, you can't just pretend nothing happened. About a few weeks later, programs resumed for the beneficiaries, but we are all still extremely upset by what has happened. Hervé? Frédéric is a friend, and I remember the exchanges we had after this exchange. I know to what extent your sadness was immense, and you had this feeling of being revolted by what had happened. You expressed this in words, and you used your usual moderation. You know, you said we're dealing with young men and women who, by generosity and empathy, decide to have a professional life where they're lending a hand to others, and they are reaching out to populations that have been, for all intents and purposes, abandoned. I know Niger well. I have a decentralized cooperation program in the area called Malbazar, not far from Nigeria. These are regions where there's almost no institutions, no public services, and they have corrupt regimes. Law enforcement agencies that are just there in name only. So obviously, if these humanitarian workers are not there to help these people, there's no one to help them. And behind that, we also see, and I mentioned this during the opening of the forum, we see the gridlock in that part of the world. We see that irrespective of the military commitment that France or the countries of the G5 Sahel might have, this is not going to find the ways and means to resolve the crisis. When I see the situation in the Sahel, I remember when I was Minister of the Defense, the situation in Afghanistan. We could always put more troops, more military means, but that was not the solution. It made it possible to, let's say, have this country taken over by the most radical groups, but ultimately the goal of a war was to build a model where there's more justice. We take care of men and women, to create conditions through education and health that would enable these people to take their destiny into their own hands, to extricate themselves from this nightmare and this dead-end situation. I haven't been to Niger in the past 7-8 years, but I'm sure that the situation is worse than it was 10-15 years ago. So obviously, we can very well see that the equation comes through understanding the fundamental needs of these people. I remember this figure because I mentioned it yesterday, but it seems so obvious to me. Indeed, we need security, we need defense. And we could ask ourselves some questions on some priorities, but 1% of military expenditures at a global level is twice the amount of Niger's GDP. So we don't have to divert a lot of means at a planetary scale to really find a solution. Not just a band-aid solution, but to create a real fresh start so these people can build another model. So I would like to express my affection and a friendship to Frédéric and all of his teams. I know for him to what extent this is a commitment on a daily basis, and this gives meaning to his life after having been engaged in politics. So his presence here today really touches us. He has often been by our sides since the forum has been set up. His NGO, his association is waging a wonderful struggle, and that is part of our program, Normandy for Peace. So we are with you fully in spirit in this time of sadness and also feeling of revolt. You know, why us? We wanted to do good. And what I hope is that ultimately those who committed those crimes, I had said this as an aside to you, I'm sure that at least France has to invest all means so that this crime will be committed, will be duly rather punished. The perpetrators have to be found. They move a lot. It's not easy, but I hope that ultimately they will pay for what they have done. This was abominable to these women and men who were trying to protect the few giraffes left in this region. Thank you. Thank you very much. The sacrifice of these men and women who have paid with their own lives, it is a recognition to all humanitarian workers. Their work is so necessary to prevent conflict and to accompany conflict resolution. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to you very sincerely, Frédéric. Thank you very much. So we have just spoken of the sacrifice of these men and women, and this resonates particularly here, a few kilometers from the landing beaches, where in the name of freedom, many young people sacrificed their lives. Yes, these landing beaches in the Normandy region and France, well, they have been inscribed on UNESCO's heritage list, and we are all very committed through the landing beaches. These are sacred values of peace and freedom, which we want to have enshrined. They are universal, and in the margins of the forum, an important dinner took place with a certain number of UNESCO ambassadors, countries like Belgium, Russia, Mali, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and Mali. And will was expressed to relaunch this candidacy of the landing beaches. And of course, Véronique Roger-Legrand, who is your ambassador at UNESCO. So she is very attached to culture in the service of peace. So please, Véronique Roger-Legrand, please come up onto the stage. You're an ambassador at UNESCO, France's ambassador at UNESCO. Thank you very much. Mr. President, the Constitutional Act of UNESCO came into effect in 1946, and it was ratified by 20 states: South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Egypt, the US, Greece, India, Lebanon, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, etc. And now there are 193 member states. This founding act, this convention that led to the creation of UNESCO, was adopted on 16 November 1945 in London. I would like to read a few elements of its preamble. The heads of state and government that put this together declared, first of all, that wars take shape in the hearts of men, and it's in the hearts of men that peace must come about. The awful war that has just ended was made possible when the ideal of democracy dignity, equality, and equality and respect for humans was renounced and replaced by will to instead value inequality of races and people, the dignity of people requires spreading culture and education, and that's why all states have an obligation to foster these values. I want to say that after the very exciting debates we have been hearing since yesterday morning, first of all, I want to thank the President Hervé Morin and the Normandy region for this undertaking to bring together every year such high caliber participants to come and discuss peace. Everything we've heard yesterday and today and everything we are now experiencing in relations between states, described brilliantly by Gérard Haro in terms of relations in France, shows that UNESCO's founding act is still relevant. We heard three new types of threats by Jean-Marc Vigilant. And Jean-Louis had said that we would, instead of sending diplomatic notes, now we launch cyber attacks. So this idea of the defense of peace in the spirits of people, because only the ideal of democracy is at the requisite level of what man needs. The urgency of recalling that we need to defend dignity of people by spreading culture and education in order to bring about justice, freedom, and peace, to resist these new threats. The second element, as Nisoto had mentioned earlier this morning, for citizens and individuals, it's necessary to negotiate peace. Negotiating peace is not an exclusive action among states and diplomats. So that's why today I want to make a suggestion. The suggestion is that it's important that all of UNESCO's goals to spread culture, education, science, to promote these goals of a democratic ideal, these things must not be abandoned, to fight all cultural relativism, to achieve universalism of the United Nations values and principles, and also the founding act of UNESCO. We together must find a way to ensure that education, culture, and security will be, as in the founding act of UNESCO, vectors designed, perceived, and experienced as vectors of peace, security, and stability. Too often we talk about peace, stability, and security through military means and actions, negotiations, but our young colleague from Tunisia showed us that it's in the classroom, in movies, in theaters where there are plays, in all these places of culture and sharing that we create peace. Over 2 days we show this, and you have been doing this at this Forum Normandy for Peace. And it's with you and with François-Xavier Préolot. We would like to create here at the Normandy Forum for Peace a global forum for education, culture, and science as a vector of security and stability. So, see you next year, because it is together with all of you that we will think of new proposals, and I hope, Mr. President, I will invite myself to the next forum, and I hope that we will be able to come and propose something to you. Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador. So you see, from year to year, Normandy for peace is gaining in dimension. There's still this need to have all these dimensions. It's multi-dimensional. This is necessary for lasting peace. You know, we all know that freedom has no price. Well, it has two, in fact, because in French there's a play on words, because the word price, prix, is also the word for award. And Iman Demenuenko will be present, and Barbara Hendricks was there. We will have the Bayeux Award for war reporters, and they play a crucial role, and it will be awarded on the 10th of October, and we will have some dozen debates on the economy. There's the Circle of Economists, and there's Jean-Hervé Lorenzi, and please don't miss our second nocturnal with Writers and Peace. Jérôme Garcet will be hosting it, and you have to comply with the barrier gestures and keep your masks on. Have a great day.